today we'll be talking about international student life. Please feel free to submit any questions in our Q&A box for our panelists to answer live. We have admissions officers moderating those questions as well to make sure that we're able to answer all of your questions. So without further ado, please welcome our panelists. How about Grace, you can start.
Thank you, Reagan. Hi, everyone. I'm Grace. I'm from London, England. I'm a senior in the Woodrow Wilson School for International Affairs and Policy. During my time on campus, I spent a lot of it playing on the field hockey team, but also got involved in other extracurricular things. I'm really excited to kind of virtually welcome you to Princeton.
I guess I'll jump in next. Hi, everyone. My name's Edward. I'm a second-year student from Toronto, Canada. Alongside JM, I'm an international orientation leader, which means that we get a group around 10 to 15 international orientation students that we take care of during international orientation events and throughout the school year. And I really love my international orientation kids, or Z's. So we're also the first, not only students, but people to really welcome you guys during international orientation. So we'd be really lucky to do that. On campus, I'm majoring in computer science, minoring in journalism. I can also answer some questions on physics or electrical engineering. I've considered those. And I'm part of the campus newspaper, The Prince, as well.
Hi, I'm JM. I'm a junior. I'm studying computer science at the School of Engineering here. I'm from Seoul, South Korea. With Edward, I'm also an international orientation leader, so I work directly with the Davis International Center here at Princeton. So we're very lucky to welcome you at the start of the year in person. Hopefully that happens in person. On campus, I'm a part of the Black Arts Dance Company group, and I work with the Entrepreneurship Club, and I've been in other school groups like a cappella groups and design agencies. So any questions about that, I would be happy to answer in more depth. That's about it for me.
Hi, good morning. My name is Andrea Kwasnicki. I work at the Davis International Center. I'm our CBIS coordinator and also one of our student advisors. So I have a caseload of both undergraduate and graduate students that I advise. And then I work more generally with the entire international population on maintaining records. So any reporting responsibilities that you may have while here after your program. So one of the processes that I oversee is the new student document issuance process, which you'll also hear called the application for visa certificate. So after you accept your offer, that would be the process that you engage in order to get your I-20 to obtain your visa. So really excited to help you ease any concerns in that process as well today.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're all safe and well wherever you are in the world. My name is Katie, and I am a staff member at Princeton Davis International Center. I am an international student advisor there. So I also advise both undergraduate and graduate students. Right now we're all there for you, but once you, if you come to Princeton, the way advising works is you're divided by residential college for international student advising. So I'm the advisor for Maddie and Whitman. But again, happy to help all of you. And we're here for all kinds of questions. We talk a lot about immigration advising, but we're also happy to help with practical concerns, things like getting a cell phone, credit cards, all of that. We're here to help with whatever questions you run into.
All right, so now that everyone's introduced themselves, we can get started with some of the questions that you guys have asked. So one of our first questions is, what is international orientation like, and what are the resources that you guys will have access to during that time?
Yeah, so I'm sure JM will have a lot to add, but I'll just start with some things. International orientation is a 3-day event. At the start, it's before all the American students come on campus, and I think that's one of the biggest advantages that you get to settle in and meet your like international friends before all the Americans come and sort of make that bond and get settled in. You get to move in first. Sometimes if you're in a quad, you get to choose a 4-person dorm. You get to choose which room you're gonna go in first. And some of the activities we have, it ranges between a lot of the Davis International Center's planned events and information sessions to help with visas and student concerns, as well as sort of like summer camp type activities. So things like playing Frisbee or board games, or we have a lot of fun group games as well. So that's mostly what it's like as well. I'm sure JM can add to all the student events.
Yeah, I think Ed covered a lot. It's really international orientation is just about 3 days in which we can really get to know each other is the priority. So students will be sorted into different international orientation groups, which will be known as IO groups when you come on campus, and you'll be designated 2 leaders per group. So you'll have 2 IO leaders who will be sort of in charge and really helping you. And we'll help you from moving into your dorm to getting immigration things sorted out with the Davis IC Center. We'll help you get your phone, new phone number, get your bank account open if that's something you want to do right ahead. And we're really just trying to streamline and integrate you right into the system while providing sort of cultural assimilation advice, having been there. Yeah, just like answer any more general questions in person and really sort of help you understand what it's like to be at Princeton, particularly as an international student. And yeah, a lot of fun activities that is like the main priority of the orientation. So yeah, it'll be a good time to like make new friends and whatnot during that time. Yeah.
Okay, great. So another question is, can one of you all explain the different support systems that are in place for the international students on campus?
Yeah, I'll start again for the student side, and I'm sure Andrea or Katie will have more answers for the staff side. So on the student side, we still continue to host international student events. We like to say that your international orientation leaders aren't just for the 3 days, it's throughout the year. We also live in the same or near residential colleges with our group. So all my students this year were in Whitman, one of the residential colleges. I'm in Whitman. So we live pretty nearby. And there's activities such as like international orientation reunion, paint and sips, to just sort of get the community together. Aside from that, there are also affinity groups on campus. So you have sort of the Latinos and Amigos. You have like the Asian American and also AFSA, a lot of the Asian groups. There's the Chinese Student Association, there's Vietnamese, there's Filipino, there's a lot of student affinity groups. There's also the Canada Club as well that I'm part of, and a couple of others.
Yeah, so the Davis International Center, as Katie said before, we tend to do a lot of immigration advising, but we also have programming that we do. And that's for things like cultural adjustment, getting used to living in the US, just social events so that you can get to interact with some of the international population in your cohorts in your class. So we're there for you in a lot of different ways, not just immigration. Whenever you have questions, we have walk-in hours, we have appointments, we're available at any time that you need us.
I also think it's worth mentioning that as an international student, you also get all the other advising that every other undergrad does. And there is a wealth of resources for everyone. So from advising in your residential college, which is what you get placed in when you first come to Princeton. For example, you have a dean there, and you also have older students to advise you. You have access to all of that on top of the Davis International Center and your international peers. So one thing I would say is, without a doubt, there is so many resources to help you as a student here achieve. you know, it's also about you seeking out the help as well when you need it.
Grace, do you think you could explain the residential college system just a little bit? It's being thrown around a little.
Yeah, of course. So when you first come to Princeton, just before you arrive, you'll get placed into your residential college, and there's 6 of them. There's 6 of them, I believe. And that's something that you're very closely tied to in your first 2 years at Princeton, and it kind of operates as your small community. They're not like the Hogwarts houses. I've heard people say that, where if you're an athlete or an engineer, you go in one. It doesn't really work like that. It's, you know, very much random, which is good, because then it becomes a small like microcosm of Princeton, and not, you know, just being surrounded by the same kind of people that you would have seeked out, for example. And the residential college kind of acts as a support system, but it's also the place that you live. So, for example, I was in Rockefeller College. So where I lived was up campus in certain buildings. And like I said, during the first 2 years, you're kind of closer linked to them, and they give you lots of opportunities to meet people and have study breaks. And sometimes they even take trips to Broadway, which is, I would highly recommend doing, definitely. So it becomes a real kind of support system, but also a way to meet different people in your first 2 years. In your second 2 years, you kind of have more flexibility to move away from them. And some people do, some people don't. I think overall, it's a really great system to kind of help make Princeton a little bit smaller when you first get there, because even though it's a small school, it can still seem daunting that there's like 5,000 plus undergrads, and how am I going to fit in and find my place? But having the residential college system there kind of turns it into, okay, let me just figure out how to master the residential college and meet people in here, and then I can start to expand. So I think it's a great system. Actually, it's not done everywhere, but it doesn't have anything to do with your major or, you know, what you pursue on campus. It's totally random, which is really good.
All right. So another one of our questions is learning the right time to start choosing classes as an incoming first year. So JM, do you think you could explain that a little bit to our panel?
Yeah. So I remember when I was a freshman, I spent so much time thinking about what classes I'm gonna take, and like really stressing over it. Um, so this is a difficult question because it really depends on what your major is. For instance, I came in as a student of studying Bachelor of Engineering here, and there are pretty predefined paths in terms of these are the prereqs you have to take: chemistry, physics, mathematics, and they're sort of required for all first-year engineering students. And it's a lot more flexible if you're coming in as a Bachelor of Arts Humanities student. The way I think course registration went is that they're going to release a course offerings list for all the classes you can take. I highly recommend. I remember I reached out to either, if you know anybody like alumni at the school, if not, reach out to, I remember reaching out to some of the actual faculty members. I was very bold and emailing them being like, what are the expectations and whatnot. And it's really sort of I remember it being a long process in terms of thinking about the trade-offs, but in the end, you have enough time when you come back to campus where there's an ad drop period or sort of a shopping period where you can really try the courses for like 2 weeks and see if they fit you or not, and drop the class and add different classes in. So there's enough flexibility so that it's not like I have to get the courses done by this particular date, but Princeton provides it so that you have enough time to like taste the classes and then adjust as you go. And finally, there are classes in which you can option to take it pass fail as opposed to grading, and that's another sort of option. But if anyone wants to add to that, I think I just sort of went on a
All right, so we are getting a couple of questions about housing. So do you think the students could start with the process, starting with the housing form and how that results in your freshman year roommates and moving on through the next 3 years of college as well?
Yeah, I can touch on housing. So when you fill out a million forms before you get to Princeton, and one of them is about housing. So they ask you your preferences. For example, would you like to be in a single? Do you want lots of roommates? Also very detailed, such as how hot do you like the room? Do you like to sleep with the air conditioning on? Or do you go to bed late? And all of those kind of things helps the residential colleges that you've been placed into kind of pair you up with what they feel is appropriate roommates. Now, it's very, very often the case that most people get on really well with their roommates and they really enjoy it. And I've known people that have been placed randomly as roommates in their freshman year and they've stayed all through their senior year to be roommates. But just because you filled out on the form that you'd like a single doesn't necessarily mean that's the way it's going to go, because obviously, there's a lot of people and you can't get all your preferences. But I have to say, I think it's a pretty effective way of doing it. And the reason I say that is because I came into Princeton and I already had my teammates and I knew some of the girls, and I would have put down that I wanted a room with a girl on my team. But the problem is that would have never pushed me to meet anyone else. And I met one of my really, really good friends through rooming with her. We're still in contact and everything. We ended up not rooming together for the whole time at Princeton. But I think a good part of that is that actually, again, it's an opportunity to meet people. Once you've filled in that form, you'll get the email that says your room number and who your roommates are. And a lot of people reach out to their roommates before Princeton and, message them on Facebook and they'll start talking. And again, that's great because before you've even got to campus, you've connected with 3, 4, 5, however many other people, which I would, definitely recommend. If in the worst case that you really have a problem with your roommate and the housing situation, you can speak to your director of student life, which is just another resource within your residential college, and explain to them the situation, and they'll do everything to help you. I also want to touch on what happens after the first 2 years, because I said before, in your first 2 years, you're closely tied to the residential college in terms of living, and you live within the residential college in certain buildings. In your last 2 years, so when you're a third year, a fourth year, junior, senior, you then have the freedom to live kind of all over campus. You can stay within your residential college, and a lot of people do. You can move to different areas of campus. There's more options to room as in a single, but you can also room with anyone. So you can pick any of your friends that might be all over campus. They don't have to be in your residential college, and you can room with them. I think for you guys, that's a long way off, but the biggest thing is that you have the flexibility once you reach your third and fourth year. Final point is that Princeton is very, very unique in the sense that all of your housing is guaranteed for 4 years. So when you first come in, you live on campus, but most people, and I know a very, very few, don't live on campus there all 4 years. Princeton has enough housing for everyone to live on campus, which is honestly great because everyone's within this small community and you can walk over 2 minutes to see your friends, and it's a really, really great sense of community there because everyone is so close. And no matter what financial aid package you're on or what your major is, or if you're an athlete, it doesn't matter, you're always guaranteed your housing, which is something I didn't realize coming in, but it's very, very significant. You don't have to go through the process of trying to scramble and find housing off campus and figuring out bills and all of that. So I appreciate that a lot.
Right. One of our attendees asked, when does each student declare their major on campus as well?
I can take that one. So that also varies between if you're a Bachelor of Science and Engineering or if you're a Bachelor of Arts. So for the bachelor's, for the 6th engineering degree, a lot of the students know which major they're going to be in, and at the end of or at the start of their sophomore year. So that's for example, that's a little earlier because there's more requirements needed, lots of, like JM mentioned, math or physics or chemistry. I also wanted to touch upon, there was a question on placing out of those requirements. So there are ways to place out of those first year requirements for the engineering courses, mainly I might be wrong about this, but it's on the course website. But if you have an AP 4 or 5 in some of those courses, or an IB 7, or there are tests that the departments give themselves. So for example, the chemistry department might have a test that you can write during your first couple of weeks at the university to place out a first year chemistry if you pass or so. On the other hand, that's different for the arts, a bachelor AB students. So major declaration day was actually 2 days ago, where usually it's a really exciting celebratory event on campus where people take photos alongside their like a flag with their major. This year it was virtual, and a lot of people chose to change their Facebook banner with a major declaration banner of their major. So that's for my year as a sophomore, a second year student. So that's around April of your second year for the art students as well.
Just to quickly add on to that, so engineers basically declare at the end of their first year, freshman year, through a little form about what they're gonna do, what they wanna become as a major, and then around this time is bachelor arts. But at the end of the day, like for me, despite being an engineering student, I went from being a MA major at the end of freshman year, very confident, to an uncertain electrical engineering major at the start of my sophomore year. And at the end of my sophomore year, I'm a coast major. So you are not going to be like pushed and funneled into what you declare first. Just know that that's sort of the school's way of sort of nudging you to make a decision, but there is enough flexibility within the majors to like learn about yourself as you go and pick and choose. So it's not a binding decision at that time. I just wanted to say that.
Some of our students are curious about the process for applying for a student visa and health insurance. So maybe the Davis Center could help a little bit with the understanding of that.
So the first step in the process will be we are going to reach out to you and give you information on how to submit what Andrea said, the application for a visa certificate. So we'll ask you for some different documents. We'll ask you for a copy of your passport, funding, and then we're going to issue you most likely something called an I-20, which is the document that you need to apply for your student visa. Once you get that document, then you will make an appointment at a U.S. embassy or consulate abroad to actually apply for your student visa. And once you're approved for that visa, that's the document that you need to enter the United States, and you can do that up to 30 days prior to the start date of your program.
All right, and could we explain the process of health insurance for the international students a little bit as well?
Yes. So in terms of health insurance, you'll have the opportunity to obtain health insurance through the university. I believe there's also, I think some people had questions about having health insurance back in their home country. Should they keep that insurance or go with Princeton's health insurance? So that's something you could talk to University Health Services about. I believe that they have specific waiver requirements for that. But if you have questions about what that health insurance covers, you can take a look at their website and follow up with them if you have any questions about it. And I'm seeing, so there's also some questions about OPT. So I can talk briefly about that. I won't go into too much detail because we could and do whole sessions on OPT, but OPT stands for Optional Practical Training. And there's also something called CPT, which stands for Curricular Practical Training. And both of those are just work authorization benefits that are associated with the student visa. So at some point during your time at Princeton, you might find that there's an off-campus work opportunity or an internship opportunity that you're interested in doing. And since you're on a student visa, you need work authorization to engage in that opportunity. And so OPT or CPT might be the mechanism for you to obtain that work authorization. Again, I don't want to bog you down too much with the details of the process. If you're really interested, there's information on our website, but it's something we do multiple information sessions on every semester. Just know that if you do get an internship or employment offer, you're going to want to plan ahead for it and make sure that you leave yourself time to apply for that work authorization through our office. But we're always here to answer any related questions to that.
That's great. So we also have a couple of questions about banking options and the opportunities to get like a United States credit card and that process.
Yeah, so one of the things we actually have at International Orientation is an information fair. So we will have representatives from banks, cell phone companies, those types of services at the information fair. So you can do that there. There's also many of those places within walking distance in the town of Princeton. You'll find a number of banks that can help you out. So if you have any questions about that specifically, again, feel free to reach out to us. But I wouldn't say that there's anything that you need to do to set that up right now. It's something that we'll work on at International Orientation. In terms of a credit card, that piece is a little bit trickier because you need a social security number in many cases to obtain a credit card. And you're only eligible to get a social security number if you have employment. So you might be able to apply for a credit card at some point, but it might not be something that you can get right away when you enter the United States.
I'm also seeing that there's a question about the start date for international orientation. So right now, it's expected to start August 19th. Now we know with everything going on that that's still a rapidly evolving situation, but right now we're planning on it starting August 19th. And if there are any updates, we'll be sure to provide those as soon as we have them. Usually registration for international orientation begins in June. So you can expect at that point that you would get more information as well.
All right. Some people, we have some questions about summer internships, the process of just getting a summer internship and how, if that's any different for the international students as well.
Yeah, so for summer internships, it's a similar process of applying. A lot of the companies in the US, when you're applying, will have, do you need visa requirement questions? So it's really a similar process of applying. It's just a little more difficult with the OPT and CPT applications afterwards. So I think that's the main concern. But if you plan ahead, and especially for future years, CPT is actually just way faster and easier, and hopefully because some of the previous students and like our seniors or juniors that didn't get internships or couldn't have their OPTs given in time, that pushed Princeton and a lot of the Ivy League universities to offer and start offering more CPT, and hopefully that will be the case for a lot of our years when we apply for internships next year. That being said, there are a lot of outside of the United States opportunities for internships, and there are a lot of Princeton supported internships opportunities that are phenomenal for especially freshmen, first year students, and sophomore as well. So for example, my freshman year, I went on an international internship program, and this is a program that's that's run just across the same room across from the Davis International Center in the same building, and it offers internships for at least over 50 countries around the world. So I was a computer science major. I was looking for something tech related, and I got to work at a tech company in Uganda and Kenya. So that was quite phenomenal. It was Princeton sponsored, and there was no visa applications because it was a Princeton grant instead of paid amount of money. This year there was another program called the Princeton Startup Immersion program that I applied to that has some international internships in startup hubs around the world. So I got in the Tel Aviv program, which means you spend 10 weeks working for a startup in Tel Aviv. Unfortunately, that one is no longer happening because of everything that's happening. But in the future years, that's definitely something else that you guys could consider. And there's also a lot of campus research opportunities. A lot of my freshman friends did research with universities or university professors or organizations during their freshman year, and there's Princeton grants for those. So there's a lot of alternative opportunities to consider aside from working for a large US corporation as well.
That's great. We also have a few concerns with the student visa process, considering the situation of the coronavirus and what might happen if that continues into the fall semester.
Yeah, we definitely understand that there's a lot of stress and concern because the situation is very uncertain as it's changing rapidly. At this point, we know that a lot of US consulates have temporarily suspended normal visa processing. So how that could affect the visa process looking down the line, we aren't yet sure of, right? In terms of the visa process here at Princeton, we're continuing to accept the ABCs and get documents issued as soon as possible, which is the best thing that we can do right now, is get you everything that you need to be prepared to apply for your visa once you're able to do so. And then at this point, we're going to continue to monitor the situation, and probably come the summer, once we have a little bit more information about what it looks like and what's going on, we can determine if any changes need to be made to international orientation and whatnot. Do you want to add anything, Katie?
I would just add, again, there's a lot we don't know. This is a situation that's evolving every day. But there are some things that we can control, right? We can still issue you documents. And so what you should do is, after you accept your offer of admission, you'll get an email from our office with instructions on how to submit your application for a visa certificate. So really make sure that you submit that to us as soon as you are able to, so you can get that document as soon as you're able to, and hopefully start the process of getting yourself in line for a visa appointment. So that's one thing that is, in your control. So make sure you take that step.
There are also a few questions about work opportunities for international students on campus during the school year and how that process works as well.
So I think some of our students can talk about the actual opportunities, but just so you know, as an F1 student, you do have on-campus work authorization for work that's done at Princeton and paid by Princeton. So during the academic year, while classes are in session, you can work up to 20 hours per week. And then during official school breaks, you could work up to 40 hours per week on campus. So maybe some of the students can chime in on opportunities.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a student that's worked on campus from like the first semester that I got to Princeton. And honestly, like there are some really, really good opportunities to work on campus, and also nice and flexible as well, which was important to me, particularly in my first 2 years. So for example, as an international student, you could work in a library, you could work for the Office of Undergraduate Admissions, which is what I do. You can also work in the dining halls. There's really a lot of opportunities for students that want to work on campus to work on campus. And we have a nice platform where you can just log on to student employment when you accept your place in Princeton, and then you can start to browse some of the jobs that they're offering, and then just apply and email the people that are kind of, I say, recruiting loosely for that job. But I would say, again, kind of when I was talking about the resources for helping you at Princeton, the jobs are there. You just have to, go and seek them out. So I would definitely recommend working, even if you don't need to. It's also a good way of structuring your time. You have something that you have to commit to. Again, a great way of meeting people as well when you first get to campus. Yeah.
If I could,
oh, sorry.
actually, go ahead, JF.
Sorry. I just meant to add on. So I've also, so there's a lot of opportunities. Like I also worked in the library, and I have a lot of friends working for different parts of the school. And then I think sophomore year, I discovered a lot of opportunities that can be tailored towards your interests and talents too. Like we have a whole collection of student agencies on campus that range from doing like, you can do photography for the school, you can do video production. There's a new school coffee club that you can work for, like a barista. Like there's gear design and publicity yearbook. I was at the student design agency, so I got to do just like different graphic design stuff. So there's a lot of more interesting opportunities as well. And you can also come work for the International Center, like I am with Ed. That's always a great option to like interact with international students. And there's a lot creative opportunities as well. I just wanted to add on, yeah.
Yeah, exactly like JM said. And if there's one thing I really wanted to know at the start of freshman year or tell myself, is that getting an SSN social security number is really beneficial in the United States for a lot of things later on. And to be able to get a social security number in the United States, you need a letter of a job or employment, and you can only get that with a campus job. So once you have that letter, there's actually a bus trip that the Davis International Center organizes near the start of the first semester for first year international students, where we have bus trips in the morning and drive you to Trenton, which is the capital of New Jersey. I learned that while here, and that's where the Social Security number office like approves that. So that's also something worthwhile to consider with campus jobs, and quite beneficial.
One thing I do want to say, and I totally agree with you, getting a social security number earlier is beneficial, but you don't need it to work on campus. So you can work on campus all 4 years and you don't need to get your social security number. So that's also important to remember, that when you first get to Princeton, if you want to work that first year and don't have your social security number, you can still do that.
Exactly. You need intent of work on campus to be able to get your social security number. Like Grace is saying, it's not the opposite.
Just to clarify, you don't need a social security number to start working on campus. That's no problem. But if you do on campus work, you would want to obtain one for tax filing purposes the following year.
We have another student question about whether or not students can stay on campus throughout the variety of breaks we have. JM, do you think you could talk a little bit about breaks on campus for our students?
Yeah, for sure. I remember I was not a big like, let's plan out my break ahead type of person. So first year, I stayed here for fall, Thanksgiving, winter break, and spring break, I think. Like, yeah, I was here on campus like all my breaks. So for sure, the school guarantees that you could stay on campus. That's always an option. They provide like dining hall plans for everybody, because you're going to be on the unlimited plan, and that's always a part of it. So you will have resources for like, yeah, to like be on campus. Nothing will change about that. Yeah, but there's always ways in which you can engage with the school. I know the school offers a lot of programs during the breaks. This is something that I only realized like sophomore year. But basically, yeah, I was realizing where all my peers are going during breaks while I was staying here, and I realized there's a lot of Princeton opportunities during breaks, like over winter break and intersession. There's like this winter session curriculum where they help you, or like internships as well, where they help you either take classes that are really interesting or like go off to a day internship with people in the industries of your interest. Slash during fall break and spring break, there's a ton of just student groups doing very interesting trips, like breakout trips to New York or different parts of the states, in different activities. At the same time, some courses fly you out abroad to study in different countries or in different areas. I think Ed was involved in one of that for his journalism class. But there's so many opportunities. At the same time, there's an option to stay, and having done both, like either is an option depending on what you're more comfortable with, because it's always nice to take a break from school during like all the semester is what I felt. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on breaks.
Great. So we also have a question of anything that maybe the Davis Center offers as a more relaxing environment or activities to do to make sure there's still a feeling of inclusion on the campus as well.
We offer our IC leaders, so Ed and JM there can speak to this, offer lots of fun events. I've seen all kinds of things. There was a paint and sip recently. So everyone had canvases and they were painting, and the IC leaders made mocktails for everyone. We had a holiday extravaganza this past winter with ornament making and gingerbread house decorating. We also do excursions, so things like apple picking off campus. There's a sculpture garden nearby that we often lead trips to. So we try to definitely do those sort of more relaxing community building activities.
Yeah, exactly like Katie said. I also put our Davis IC Instagram in the chat. If you want to see photos of those events, feel free to. Aside from that, the only thing I wanted to add on is that your groups, so the 10 to 15 student groups, also have study breaks. I check in and hang out. I have yeah, this year in my group, there's kids from all over the world, like Australia, Kenya, Philippines, and so we hang out in Whitman together. We also have a great just American community as well. You have your we're not your only we're your first sort of student leaders that you hang out with, but we're not your only. You also have your Z group leaders, which are sort of the Princeton residential college student leaders. You also have your outdoor action or community action leaders. So there are a lot of other
Great. So we're also some of the students are wondering what's like the average Friday night or weekend looks like for some of the students that we have on campus.
Yeah, I can speak about that. It really depends on, you know, what you enjoy doing. Like if you enjoy going out for dinner on a Friday night, a lot of people do that. Or if you enjoy just relaxing, you can do that. Or there are opportunities to socialize as well, kind of decompress a little bit from a busy week. I think it's really down to what you enjoy, and there are opportunities to do different things. There's not one way of doing things or one thing that people do on a Friday night. I kind of like just on a Friday night specifically to just hang out with friends in my room or watch a movie. I feel like by the time I get to Friday, sometimes I just need to relax rather than anything else. But yeah, I think it really depends on what you enjoy, and don't feel like there's a certain thing that everyone does on a Friday night that you have to do. In terms of the weekend, there are opportunities to socialize. A lot of people do that, a lot of people don't. So again, it's really, really flexible. I've enjoyed that side of it, actually, not having to do a certain thing on a certain day. And that's kind of nice why like you find different friends, or different friends enjoy doing different things, and you can kind of pick and choose whatever you feel like. I hope that answers people's question.
Yeah. Can also a few of you guys, of the students, please talk a little bit about the adjustment to Princeton with that first semester, and kind of and how you manage the academic pressure over the years as well.
Yeah, I'll speak again. I think that it's a massive adjustment when you first come in. I think it's really important not to kind of trivialize what an adjustment it is, and how much of a struggle that it can be, and kind of understand that, you know, don't have this illusion that you're going to come in and everything's going to fall into place. I think that's what I was guilty of, and then I was end of my first year like, oh, okay, this is really not what I expected. It is an adjustment, but I think the best thing you can do when you get there is really immerse yourself in it. It's very tempting just to stay in your room and, you know, miss home. I missed home a lot. But the best way I found dealing with that was, and dealing with the adjustment, was to try and immerse myself in all the opportunities that I was being given as a first year. So, you know, go to the events that the Davis Center is holding, go to the events that the residential college is holding, and you know, you'll start to find your friends and, you know, the kind of group of people that you feel comfortable with. And I would say that was massive to help me adjust. You know, it taught me a lot about what it's like to live in America and what it's like to socialize, you know, with different people from different countries. Before, there was never really any internationals at my school, so this was totally new to me. But I think the best thing you can do is try and just open yourself up to feeling uncomfortable, and be okay with feeling uncomfortable. You know, kind of get used to that feeling of, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know anyone in the room, and, you know, this is not my comfort zone, because everyone else there, including the Americans, are feeling the same. They're still confused about what they're meant to be doing or who everyone is, and this adjustment, everyone's going through it. It's different for us. We're international students. We can't pop home for the weekend if we feel homesick. That's something that's challenging sometimes. But I think that's when your support system and your friends that you've made really comes into its own, to kind of help you get through those moments that are tough, and be okay with that. Like, I'm a senior, and sometimes I'm still like, oh man, I wish I could go home this weekend, and I really miss my dogs. But, you know, that's when I reach out to my friends and I socialize with people. So yeah, I think just be okay with, you know, feeling not okay, and really lean on that support system that you have, from your friends to the Davis Center to your other international friends. You know, there are, like I said, a wealth of resources out there, and people that genuinely want to see you do well and adjust to Princeton. So use that.
All right. We also have a question about the different international student groups on campus. As Rudy spoke about a little bit about it earlier, do you think you could elaborate on that some more?
Yeah, a lot of I'm sure a lot of affinity groups will reach out, and yeah, be there to support you. I'll talk about I'll talk about the ones that I've gone to events for. So on breaks, Thanksgiving's always a pretty interesting one for international students. One, it's a different event, and two, it's a place where like all the Americans celebrate and go home, but international students don't. In Canada, Canadian Thanksgiving is actually a different month, a month earlier than American Thanksgiving. So that's when people in Canada go home and sort of celebrate with their families. We don't get that break at Princeton, unfortunately. So Canada Club has a huge dinner that they host every year, where all the Canadians just eat nicely, like cooked turkey, and they have like butlers at Princeton that cut the turkey for you and serve it. And that's in like a nice building, campus club on campus, which is great every year. There's also events that I went to of just watching hockey games and supporting the like Princeton teams. We have a hockey rink right on campus that they're playing. Some of the other affinity groups I've seen, the Latinos and Amigos host events in Whitman where they just have like food and music and celebration type events that are really great. And those groups are all just amazing communities that they reach out to you. And adding on to what Grace said about, and JM talked about the breaks and sort of reaching out to your friends, I think that's really important, especially American Thanksgiving, which is sort of the first major break, like weekend away from campus. A lot of international students actually reach out to their roommates if they have roommates in New Jersey, and that's sort of like a great support system. Some of them invite their international friends to go to their houses and have Thanksgiving dinner there, and that's sort of a great way to also, at the same time, experience American culture. So that's always great to reach out to your support system and friends on campus that you make.
We also have a question about the academic culture at Princeton and what's that like. JM, do you think you could speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. The academic culture is probably hard to describe and encapsulate in a couple words, but like it's very diverse. I'll say that in terms of interests, but at the same time, I do acknowledge that this is Princeton, so it is quite rigorous. Personally, coming from my sort of South Korean academic background, which was, I felt very different from the Princeton background. I thought I had been through a lot of the competitive learning environments back home, coming from the environment I came from. But when I came to Princeton, I think the academic culture was different in the sense that it was a lot more, I think what Princeton strives to teach us is a lot more critical thinking, and there is no clear right answer towards things, which I had a struggle adjusting because I always thought, being like an engineering student, that there's a right answer and I could just, yeah, figure out there's a clear right answer and it's sort of binary in that way. But I think what the writing seminar and what the humanities courses and even the engineering courses really forces you to think about is like, how are you taking the knowledge that you learned and transferring that to apply that really in a rigorous way? And I think it really has exercised my brains in which ways in which I did not do during high school. So I think that's sort of the academic sort of aura of how we yeah, how Princeton wants you to sort of cultivate that type of thought. In terms of actually getting down to the work, for me, I can speak from an engineering perspective. There's a lot of problem sets in which you could actually work with your group of friends. So in that sense, I want to emphasize that it is a very collaborative environment. So despite the preconceived notion of like, it's Princeton, there's a lot of students who are competitive, like at the same time, I found it really great that there are resources such as the collaboration policies on courses are pretty lax in the sense that they want you to learn a lot, but they want you to learn from each other. And there's enough resources from teaching assistants who are students who've taken the class and grad students to preceptors, and like the McGraw Teaching Center has tutors. So it's very like, as much as the type of thinking is very rigorous, there's enough resources to help you really guide you into becoming a more, you know, well-rounded person in that sense academically. So yeah, I do want to emphasize that there's a lot of collaboration involved in the learning culture here. Yeah.
Thanks. So we also have a question of what you should consider carrying to campus while packing. If any of you all have any advice on that front.
Yeah, maybe work on with your parents on that. I think on like things when you get to campus, I think what you buy is another like is a better way to phrase that. A lot of the things because you have limited space to bring to campus, you'll be buying a lot of things. And during international orientation, we have a trip to Walmart to with like the leaders to sort of help you buy like racks, clothing racks, like laundry, detergent, things that you need, possibly mirrors to furnish your room. Similar to that, there were some other questions about things to get from campus on laptops. I think that was like a thing that I've definitely considered in high school because I had a really old laptop that I used for a lot of years. So I considered buying another Windows laptop, the Huawei book, or the MacBook. I think there's definitely a bias for a MacBook on campus. So I ended up getting a MacBook after deciding a long time, which was a good bit more expensive than all the other options. But I think at least for computer science majors, there's definitely some bias in a lot of the courses for Mac or Linux systems. On textbooks, buying textbooks on campus, there's no worry to that. There's a bookstore, Labyrinth, right outside of campus that sells all the books that you need for your classes, or you can just buy from older students through a Facebook group chat. So I think those are the main things I see here that are things you need for the school year. But everything that if you want to decorate your room, or if your parents have things that they want to give you or recommend, you're really just starting a new chapter as an independent adult. So it's a very exciting time.
I just want to add that Princeton is an area with 4 distinct seasons, so it can get quite hot in the summer and pretty cold and snowy in the winter. So be mindful of that when packing clothes, but also know that you can buy more clothes. You know, if you need a winter jacket or whatever, when you get here, you can certainly buy those things. And one packing tip for you, because you're probably going to have carry-on bags and checked luggage, make sure that you pack your immigration documents in your carry-on bag so that when you have to go talk through the customs and border control officers, you have those documents with you.
All right. For the students on the panel, what made Princeton stand out to you from an international perspective as the right fit for you guys?
I'll start first, and then I'm sure Grace and JM have a lot to add. I'll start with academically. I think Princeton is very rigorous academically, but at the same time, there's really a lot of flexibility to explore. Some of the other options I was considering globally for colleges were Canadian and UK colleges as well. And then I think the biggest difference was coming to Princeton compared to those other universities. I didn't need to go in with a set major and declaration. I probably would have declared if I went to the University of Toronto, for example, engineering or computer engineering or something around that sort, or civil environmental engineering. I was considering declaring that for another university. I think Princeton allowed, one, the flexibility to explore. I ended up still being a computer science major, but at the same time, something I would never have expected is I've been taking a lot of journalism courses here. I've actually I've taken the same amount of writing and journalism courses at Princeton as computer science courses, and that would have been crazy to me because in high school, I've did a lot of math, physics, computer science, and none of the writing stuff. I think that's really great because there's a lot of these certificate programs and even a flexibility on changing majors between the engineering majors, between an arts bachelor's that allows you to explore. And they really, I think the US and Princeton model really does allow you to explore what you want. I think, yeah, a lot of the journalism courses I took here, took an audio journalism class freshman year, and a refugee reporting class sophomore year, and a creative writing class right now. And these classes were all like, the first ones were sort of a random, I just want to try this out. And then you get to have the opportunity to try out new classes. I think academically, that was just like really exciting to be able to explore things that I never might have. Community-wise, I love the international community on campus, and I genuinely think they're a really great group of people to hang out with that make Princeton sort of like what it is, and what what you feel as a second home as well.
There's a lot, but I remember before I came to Princeton, a lot of the things I saw online was like academically, for instance, just to add on to what Ed said, like you have these like distribution requirements that Princeton wants you to take that are in different fields like ethics or socials, like social studies, or in the language and arts. And these felt like a lot of requirements, and I was like, okay, this is how I should sculpt it. But looking back, like those sort of requirements that Princeton wants you to be a sort of well-rounded student was sort of what I wanted going in. And through that, I took like philosophy classes, economics classes, psychology classes and seminars that have really shaped the way I think as even a computer science engineering major. So for me, like going from these are requirements on paper to like this is actually what has impacted my life in different perspectives and ways has been very enriching. And I think looking back, that's what I wanted going into sort of college. Like, yeah, I want somewhere that I can not just be like a good, mathy engineering person, but like I just wanted to be like a more critical thinker and like a more well-rounded human being. And I think in those ways, Princeton really helped. At the same time, I also remember the website really emphasizing the ratio between students and teachers and how the small school size really impacts you. And I thought that was very like abstract at the moment, but looking back again, like, wow, like Princeton is like really small in the sense of like the size of the school compared to other schools. The more I talk with my friends at other, Ivy League schools like Harvard and Yale, like the fact that I feel like I know most of the students on campus now, and that's really hard to say, I think, at a college campus. But just because like there's so many overlapping communities here, and people are all very diverse and well-rounded in their sense. So it's like, it's very easy to get to know people. And then at the same time, it's easy to reach out to faculty because the faculty are really there to emphasize like the education for the undergrads. So the fact that I, for instance, over winter break, really got interested in neuroscience. So then I just reached out to one of the head of the labs at the Neuroscience Institute here. And then we just started researching like 2 months ago. And that happened in like over 2 weeks. And I think that's kind of crazy looking back because it only happened because the scale at which Princeton works is like, this is a huge emphasis on the undergraduate education. And I think, overall, like that is what I came to Princeton for. And I think that is what I'm getting out of it. So it's like, the size, the ratio, the community, the sort of well-roundedness, all of that has been very enriching for me personally. Yeah.
So I'll finish up. For me, and I've had a lot of time to think about this now that I'm done. For me, I think Princeton, I saw a place, I didn't quite understand the sheer amount, but I saw a place with a lot of opportunities. And that was really important. If I was going to uproot my life and move, across to North America, I wanted to go to a place where I was going to have so many opportunities. And I can truly say that, no matter what you're involved in, whether it's athletics or computer science or whatever, there are so many opportunities for students here to pursue things you're interested in, both academically, like JM was saying, but also extracurricular. Like, for example, I know that you write for the Prince, like that's a great opportunity if you're interested in journalism. I really enjoyed like I wanted to play competitive sports, and Princeton gave me that opportunity. And you know, I think it's a really unique place in the sense that there are really no limits in what you want to do and what you want to make of it. If you want to make it, you know, this experience full of such a diverse range of experiences and opportunities, then you can do that. And that's something that I really appreciated. And I think, you know, I used that time wisely, and I really did try and get such a, you know, range of different experiences when I was at Princeton. And I'm so grateful that it gave the students so many opportunities to do different things. Like that's what really kind of hooked me in for Princeton. So yeah.
All right, guys, so we are about to wrap up. If you guys didn't have any of your questions answered, we are actually going to put up a contact slide for all of the people that were in this panel today. So feel free to contact them with any further questions. We can start with the contact slide, which is about to be shared to you all's screen right now. All right, with that, we have finished our international student panel. We want to thank all of you guys who have joined us to learn more about our support resources and offerings at Princeton. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the people on this panel today, be it Office of Admission or Office of Financial Aid, with any specific questions you may have. We have a program where we have one-on-one Zoom calls with a Princeton admissions officer, financial aid officer, or current student that are available. And we also have further panels throughout the rest of April as well. All right, again, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you all today, and we look forward to seeing you all in the fall.